Hello, everybody. So these are all the books I read in 2025. Um, I'm just gonna try to keep it a little bit less kind of talky than the last one because I noticed that even if I don't like read a hysterical number of books or I'm not challenging myself in that way in a quantity, I guess, then I still like whatever I'm still like kind of rambling about each book and like, ooh, what I thought of, if I didn't like it or I did like it. So rather than doing that, if I really like it, obviously I'm try to sometime down the line make a separate review for it. But these are just kind of just a catalog of all the different books I read, and I try to do this every year. And yeah, so January of 2025, I read A Writer's Diary, Virginia Woolf, which was basically it's nonfiction, but it's kind of account of her life, daily life. Um, and then The Joke by Milan Kundera. Um, that obviously wasn't the first one I read by him. I want to say like that was probably I don't know if it's The Identity, I think, or Unbearable Lightness of Being. Obviously a fan of his. I still got to read some of his other stuff. I think what some of his later works I haven't yet got to. Poor Things. Alistair Gray, Scottish writer. Obviously really funny book. Goddesses. I made a review for that one too. So okay. And I keep mixing it up with Poor Folk by Dostoevsky. Heck, I'm surprised I didn't say that this time, but I have it. I have it read out here. I have it written out for me. So, um, Goddesses in Every Woman by Aline Shinoda Bolin. She's kind of in the vein of Jungian psychology, so another nonfiction kind of account of um, the differences between all the different kind of personalities like Aphrodite and um, anyway. So yeah, The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. Um, yeah, I did a review for that. I don't know if I've read. It might be his only official published work. I'm not sure, but yeah, definitely looking into more of Pessoa if I can find any. The Burnout Society by Byung Chul Han. Sorry if I get that name wrong. This again, another nonfiction kind of philosophical kind of take, essayist kind of take. Yeah, I really liked it. He compares the Bartleby the Scrivener, kind of Bartleby the Scrivener, to the kind of plight of the working man and being overworked and having like completely this idea of like preference. I'd prefer not to do this. And this it's kind of a symbol of that he talks later on in the work. It's not a long work. It's not maybe a few hour read, maybe 5 hour, 4 hour. Yeah. A Spectre, A Haunting by China Mieville. That was the second thing I read by him. I went into that not knowing fully what that was about, and then I realized it was a non-fiction thing, so it wasn't one of his creative fiction works. He kind of writes in the vein of a little bit like what's it? Speculative fiction, a little bit. Sometimes science fiction. But yeah, that was more so a his kind of opinion on the Marxist kind of Lenin, or not Lenin, but just Karl Marx and their writing, him and Friedrich Engels, and their writing the Communist Manifesto. So yeah. The Moviegoer by Walker Percy. For some reason I didn't write his full name there. Um, yeah, I like that too. Southern Gothic too. Really has it gets really sad partway through the. um, I don't know. I think I did a review on that too. Also would like to read more of his work too. Penguin Island by Anatoly France. That one was a pretty funny one too. Uh, not quite as dark as kind of the Revolt of the Angels, and I think those are the only two I read by him. Um, anyway, so Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. I remember seeing that on. I did. I'm pretty sure I did a review on this, but yeah, I remember hearing about that a while ago and never, it was probably pretty a bestseller. Kind of unbeknownst to him, like I don't think Frank McCourt knew the depth of how of just like the how wide of a audience he would reach with that. He thought that no, like it would slip under most people's radar, but it had the opposite effect. Slouching Toward Bethlehem by Joanne Didion. It's a series of kind of um, really well crafted kind of opinion pieces and different things that I think some of them are taken from different journals, and it's Didion talking about her, and she's a um, inimitable, really kind of powerhouse of a writer too in her own right. And in both, I haven't read much of her fiction, but I have read different kind of uh, her kind of journalistic kind of um, writings as well, and those are probably the how I mostly kind of am acquainted with her. But yeah, I think with this one, she's talking about different kind of figures of the '60s. Like she talks about how she met with Joan Boaz in that her school she had kind of a school of like different activists and stuff like she opened up in California. I can't remember exactly where, um, but she was talking about how as an activist too that Boaz was trying to keep or maintain the school property. Like she was trying to um, she was fighting for the right to kind of do that, and there was a lot of kind of controversy as to like the land ownership and all that, or whether they were operating within reason. So yeah, really interesting kind of set of essays there. And The Colossus of New York by Colson Whitehead. Really almost kind of a poetic kind of love letter to New York, I think. Um, Not too long of a read. Um, but yeah, I heard this other book really that people were really affected by that he wrote that I really like to read. Um, John Cheever audio collection by John Cheever. Um, I heard about him vaguely, and again, for some reason, I'm blanking on so much of what that was about. But there was some pretty funny stories there. Some of them reminded me a bit of like um, a little bit of like what am I getting at? Some of John Updike stories. And then some of them were like a little bit like um, almost like detective stories in a way. But yeah, The Cockroach by Ian McEwan. It's a very much a Kafkaesque kind of thing. A very interesting kind of. Um, I thought it got a little bit too kind of politically heavy. Like it was like McEwan kind of talking about Brexit and how the cockroach symbolizes different things about Britain. But I also took it very much as a Kafka-esque kind of tribute as well. With the with being turned or transmogrified into some kind of vermin species or something is very much up my alley. So that's why I got it. But I didn't quite know that it was more so like a um, kind of against political ideologies and stuff like that, which is fine too. But I just didn't quite expect it. That's all I'm saying. Rabbit Run by John Updike. I think that's I don't know if that's my first Updike thing, or maybe if I read him the year earlier. But yeah, yeah. John Updike has kind of an issue with Nabokov. Has he's in that kind of vein of, and David Foster Wallace talked about this, and I think one of the one of the essays he wrote in Consider the Lobster, kind of in there, impact in there, or it might be a different one, but collection. But he talks about how his prose or his writing in general is kind of turgid, like it's like thick. It's like it's just layered on with tacking on adjectives and this and that, and it's very flowery too. It's like there's a lot of and it's crafted in such a way that you can't help but be impressed by it, and then other times it's like, but when you're using it for like a full-on novel, I found it tiring at times. Like it just like was bogged down by how just simple scenes of of like I don't know, collegiate kind of people like interacting, and how um but yeah. And then there's the other, what he had a trilogy, right? John Updike. He had like the I read the Centaur. That's probably the first one I read by him. That actually was probably like maybe a few summers ago, maybe 2021, maybe that I read that. But yeah, some of his stuff is like didactic too. It's like a little bit pedantic. I'd a much more fitting term. Um, 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. I had this one on my list for a while, but I was intimidated by the size, and um, that one was, yeah. I have a review for it. I obviously loved it. Overall, I liked what the characters were. I think the female characters that Murakami gets a little bit of flack for writing a little bit one dimensionally, kind of as a in the as a kind of spectacle of, I don't know, of kind of a male gaze, I guess some people might say. But yes, in that one he was able to craft like female characters that had more complexity to them. He actually went more into their, um, which is maybe not surprising because it's like later in his life too. This is what pretty recent compared to other stuff when it came out. Yeah, Scanner Darkly, Philip K. Dick. Slowly working my way through that stuff. I still have, what's it called? Was it Synchronicity? I still have one of his books on my shelf, waiting to read. Knife by Salman Rushdie. I talked about that. The Last Man by Mary Shelley. I'm really not sure if I want to. I felt this one as ambitious and like uh far reaching as this novel was, like as far as like depth wise, and it's something like what, 600 to 700 pages maybe. It was a little bit like you felt this, the on the first hand it's like oppression kind of warning. There's like a lot of really good, really well crafted kind of beyond its time, science fiction, speculative fiction of like what might happen in the very last kind of um with the very last man to exist. But yeah, I just felt like it was a little bit hard to follow at points because the I felt like it just got a little bit, I don't know, not clunky, but just like heavy handed with, I don't know, the Frankenstein. That was like, you could tell that was like broken down a little bit more easily. Like, I wouldn't say like necessarily recommend to a kid reading it, but teenagers too. Like I'd imagine maybe them. But when I read it, you know, in my early 20s, I didn't feel like it was like that. I don't know. I felt like I related to certain aspects of both the monster and Frankenstein himself, and the loneliness he felt too. And there's just so many layers to that. But the Last Man, I felt like was a little bit, I don't know, intriguing, but you felt like you couldn't really relate to him quite as much. I don't know. Anyway, so in April, I read On Writing by John Gardner, which is John Gardner wrote this book, really interesting book called the Gretel. I'm sorry, Gretel, which is obviously about the Gretel, the monster, the kind of medieval folklore beast that's in Beowulf, and Beowulf is kind of set out to destroy pretty much. And yeah, he talks about like all the kind of in the kind of fashion that it was originally written. And I think I did a review on this, but yeah, I just want to kind of say a little bit about I just liked how there's an existential nature to how to the because it's from the point of view of the monster Gretel, so that which I thought was really interesting. And I just thought that was I was like, oh well, I want to slowly make my way through John Gardner stuff, and he had some really really pretty solid tips on like writing. Like he said, like you're, as much as you want to be, novelists imagine themselves kind of clad in kind of leading kind of opulent, not necessarily opulent, but just kind of respected, eminent lifestyles. Like you'd imagine writers to be applauded in the streets, and like to have at least a fancy kind of maybe apartment or something kind of. But he says that like that's like pretty a really kind of a stretch to believe that's going to happen to you. Like that's writing isn't in general, like if you're doing it for the money, like if you're with that end goal kind of in sight, you're gonna kind of lose sight of who, like the kind of real I guess the authentic kind of appeal that writing has. Like you because it is on one hand it is a cathartic kind of element to it, and it's also like Flannery O'Connor said, like it's like a giving birth to a piano sideways. It's like very difficult, terrain trying to navigate and trying to sculpt a piece of fiction. I can imagine. Only because I've written one like actual finished book, but I'm working a second one here. But the other stuff I haven't like actually edited out into the point where it's like even worthy of even mentioning them. But they're out there. This big tome like of uh pretty much just kind of fictional like stories that like start and then end abruptly, because I still have to go over it again and edit it. Um, but yeah, so after that, I read The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, or Echo. I think the C is, I think it's Icho, but I could be wrong. Yeah, I think this is the first thing I read by him. I still have. Oh yeah, I read Foucault's Pendulum, but then I feel bad because it was actually an abridged version. So I have to go, because I was so intrigued by the first kind of by that enough to want to go read that again. But so The Name of the Rose as well. I think did I do a review of this? I'm not sure. I forget so much stuff. So much stuff happens. Um, yeah, I think so. That's a really interesting kind of neo noir kind of murder mystery. Monks like this. The arguments and the kind of things, and then like the blind monk, the kind of archetype of that blind monk, and then the kind of holier than thou kind of uh proselytizers that uh are only there to bring it down to other monks. And I thought that was an interesting kind of dynamic between all the characters involved, wrapped up in all these murders that happen in the monastery. So taking place in the 12th century, I think. Uh, the Twilight Word by Werner Herzog, or Werner Herzog if you're going German. Um, just like Wim Wenders is Vim Vendors. Yeah, interesting kind of this. I think he's talking about the Japanese pilot in the World War II. That really interesting kind of thing. I cannot for the life of me remember the name, but Herzog is taking a nonfiction kind of approach, but he's definitely has a kind of a vision, imagination of describing where this uh, samurai, pretty much kind of a samurai kind of warrior. It might be actually no, he wasn't a pilot. He was a more of a kind of a soldier that kind of trained in the martial arts as well. There's a lot of Japanese soldiers I imagine were, especially during the Second World War, and he was talking about how he was not discovered for some 20 years or something, or it might have been less than that, but it was like a long time passed between the transit between World War II and peacetime, when he received news. It was like a delayed kind of news, and then they found he was still in the woods out there surviving off of his own, on this. I think it was one of those, not Guatemala, but one of those island territories in the kind of Pacific. What do you call it? This Pacific theater of the war. So he was out there in the for a long time. I think that's kind of what happened to I don't know if it was this certain sect of Russian, really really almost monastic kind of families that are so they were so removed from society that they didn't hear about the war either. I think it might have been the same war, maybe same time period, but they're like a kind of really cloistered together Russian kind of family that are out there in the kind of middle of nowhere. But don't rely on me to be able to tell the names of these, because I can't remember. But I'm sure if you do a quick Google search, you might be able to find that. Catching the Big Fish. Oh, another director book. I didn't notice I did that right after that. David Lynch, obviously. I think that's the only thing he wrote, but it's basically his nonfiction, obviously, and he's just talking about meditation and how there's like how it actually helps out. Like one of the things I thought he was like said that was really helpful was like that one of the kind of misconceptions maybe people get about him is that he's us like how does somebody with so many dark films that are like so morbid at times, especially stuff like Eraserhead, comes to mind. How does he how does meditation, like how like does how does he kind of what's the word, combine that, like those, that worldview with it seems to be like kind of incompatible, I guess. But he's Lynch said something effect of that, like there's darkness in the world, and he's just kind of being true to that kind of darkness, but he's not trying to he's not trying to depress a viewer. He's just trying to kind of hold a mirror up to the world and show that this is reality, and it's through a skewered lens. Maybe this is me saying this, but obviously, but this is just me trying to portray things um, through, using meditation kind of actually helps with that too, especially his version, the way he used TM, which is transcendental meditation. So you have a mantra typically with that, and yeah, The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood. Oh yeah, I finally, yeah, that was, yeah, very interesting speculative fiction. That was actually kind of taking. I did a review of this. I'm pretty sure. I think. Um, Margaret Atwood is taking uh pointers from what she saw going around her in uh the Berlin Wall falling in the late '80s. I'm gonna say, because I think she lived in Berlin for a time. She's American, I think, New Englander, but she lived in Berlin, I think, around the time, and was talking about how The Handmaid's Tale kind of echoes a lot of that, the fears and kind of what might happen with the world. It seemed like, especially the Cold War in general, like how, how much um this burgeoning kind of underlying fear of like what at any moment anybody could do something. Yeah. And May, I read Man in the Dark by Paul Auster. Oh yeah, I think I did this review. I'd like to do more of Paul Auster too. So just I can't remember the name of the other one he had. But Man in the Dark is like told through a really dreamy kind of lens. Lots of a really cerebral kind of landscape. Um, The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, one of the more famous what you would call detective noir kind of fiction in the 30s. And I don't know if I did a review of this. I feel like so many people have done a review of this. It's such a quintessential, like, well told uh, detective kind of fiction. Like there's a murder. People are questioned, and the detectives and the private investigators all have to kind of. There's a love interest that is caught in the middle of it. That she might be involved in the murder in some way or something like that, and he has to kind of navigate around that. But it's kind of the archetypal kind of story, kind of like um, yeah, collected poetry of John Keats. I thought this was his Ode to a Nightingale was probably one of my favorites off that. You'll notice that even though, like, I love poetry, I just no, I don't have a lot. I have recently got this one book, The Open Door, collected poetry, and there's like it's a magazine that I heard about that a friend recommended, and that's collected poetry, but I haven't started yet. So, but I'll let you guys know. So, yeah. Nocturnal Apparitions by Bruno Schultz. Why am I blanking? Bruno Schultz. Oh yeah, Bruno Schultz, the great muralist, the great oratory. He would tell his classroom stories, and he would to his when he taught school to young people, young kids, he would recite like tales of his to them, and you get the sense of because he was what, Polish, I think. Anyway, so in June I read The Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord. Obviously a philosophy kind of essay, a long kind of short. It's long for, if I'm saying essay, but it's also short for a book because it's like 100 something pages. But yeah, he just talks about. I'm not even gonna bother trying to pretend like I know the first thing about what his it's basically against capitalism in a very, if I'm stripping it down to its core, I guess. and he really goes after, kind of incriminates and capitalism for how it has no, it's like capitalism has, like he talks about, cites Marx here, but he's like also says that Marx might have not gone far enough, I think, in some ways. I think he's starting to go even more progressive than Marx in a way that he's, De Boer says that, literally just listen to a thing on this, that capitalism is like, it's bound to kind of kill itself, or it's bound to kind of wrap itself up in a way, in its self annihilation, because it's like its only mode is consume, consume, consume. So people are going to be left spiritually dead. Kind of what, Byung Hun San, or sorry, Byung Han was talking about in the Burnout Society. So, but the interesting thing is that this book started like an instigated, a kind of a really, not kind of, but a major student kind of uprising, not like a violent one, but in France when it came out in the 60s, I want to say. This is Guy Debord's only thing that he didn't die, he didn't live very long, he actually passed away. I think he committed suicide, actually. Sorry. I didn't want to, like, just like, I know some people go like, oh, he unalived himself, and kind of find that kind of annoying, because it's like, I mean, it sounds like you're just kind of, you're not, like, you're making light of it, like, he unalive, don't unalive yourself. It's like you're not helping by quirky, making some quirky little way, or just like the way people like say, like, even like the word sex. It's like sex. Oh, like the word sex. Let's write it out like a child, or put a little mark in it, being like S. It's like, it's just like, I get it, because it's like in this age, but at the same time it's like weird, because on YouTube too, it's like people. This is just me ranting. Oh, at the same time, on YouTube too, it's like weird, because things are like, are really questionable, like illicit things are allowed on there, with in full view, so it's like kind of like, oh, do as we say, not as we, I don't know, like, it's like, anyway. But yeah, so yeah, Guy Debord, he suffered from a pretty uh, strong, severe form of depression, and that was only exacerbated by the fact that he thought that nobody nobody was like ready for what he had to say in the Society of the Spectacle. This little book that he pamphlet was, circulated around on this college campus, and then he um he excuse me, he was, all these students had, they were trying to, I guess, ban the book, so they were going around trying to get the book back in print. And yeah, there's a really, really, like, it started like a really, because it started out like as a one tiny, tiny little outcry of like, this shouldn't be happening, this shouldn't be banned, and then nobody would thought it would actually get any more traction than that, and then before you know it, like, it kind of blossomed slowly into a wide kind of, so it's a really interesting kind of how civil revolts, how civil kind of um way of acting out, or rebelling against authority, can actually be a, can actually have, um I don't know what I'm doing with that. So after that was Awakenings by Oliver Sacks. I don't know if I didn't do a review, but yeah, this is him talking about all the different patients and he had with different forms of a syphilitic kind of, it was a dormant, I think it was called, because it was like a latent form of syphilitic kind of um illness that these people had, and they all had, from the 30s, I think, some of them, even like earlier than that, and then I think, no, wait, I think maybe it was even, because it takes place in the 80s, I think. Came out, I think, in 1990, or maybe that was the movie came out in 1990, and then this came out in the early 80s. So, but yeah, obviously the movie had, Robin Williams as, not as the, technically it was Oliver Sacks, but the character's name is Malcolm Sayer. So, but he was pretty much just playing, Sacks. And then Robert De Niro played one of the leading roles as, I can't remember the name of his But he was the one suffering from the kind of latent form of a syphilis that kind of went to the brain and kind of created this kind of a foggy kind of um, mental state where people were um, kept kind of in a paralytic kind of condition where they're just like there's a word for this. You're still responsive to certain stimuli. So there's one scene where he's throwing a ball at one of the older ladies, and then she catches it kind of unknowingly with a kind of reflexive kind of thing. So there's like a some kind of neurological kind of thing that's going on with that. He was kind of trying to figure that out, and he made a way, and he called this thing called L-Dopa, this medicine drug that he was wondering if that would be able to kind of awaken the patients, hence awakenings, into kind of out of their sleep, and that's kind of what that happens, and they all kind of awaken, and they're no longer they have to um now they're fun and living and spree, but it only lasts for a certain time. For I think unfortunately with Robert De Niro's character, he was his form of it actually went back into kind of a recessive form where Jesus, I don't know why my voice is where it kind of went back into this somehow it didn't work. It kind of he was the only one of the few that kind of didn't. So luckily it was like it wasn't more than that, but yeah, he kind of recessed back in this kind of a stupor state or into a semi kind of unconscious state, and never awoke because yeah, but that was sad because you could see like how kind of the joyful kind of outgoing kind of positive bloss or the upbeat attitude that a lot of them had. Um, I like how he like mentioned the Rilke's the tiger poem. How the tiger's like he felt like akin or simpatico with the tiger, kind of pacing back and forth in itself. Um, yeah, Rilke's probably gonna talk about poetry. Yeah, that guy is not only that, but like the Notebooks of Matilda Reed's Briggs. That one too is like so really impacts me in a way that other poetries and stuff people kind of don't really leave a mark on you. But yeah, anyway, yeah, slowly working my way through Oliver Sacks' stuff too. Interesting guy too. Was he motorcyclist, powerlifter? At some points in his life. Anyway, Gargantua and Pantagruel. I read the abridged version of this. I'm not gonna lie. The big one is like I do have somewhere. I stored away on my shelf. It's like this big. It's like 700, 800 pages. Um, it might even beat up there. I can't find like the world's longest books for all I know. But yeah, really really funny. Like these two giants, Gargantua and Pantagruel, and they're like, it's a kind of interesting kind of usage of what Mikhail Bakhtin, I think his name was. No, not the political guy, not the political activist, but the one of the Russian semiol. He worked in literary criticism. That's what he was. When he wrote a book on the poetics of Dostoevsky, but he also had one on François Rabelais, and that one I still have not yet to read. But he mentions him in the as a form of the carnivalesque trope of and kind of the body horror trope, I think, or maybe that originated later. I'm not sure, but the body horror trope was this idea of like like the carnivalesque things are taken to their height. The wise people become fools, and which you see in Dostoevsky all the time is like people is switching this kind of personalities kind of or in their original kind of forms. Anyway, but the Fran Lebowitz reader by Fran Lebowitz. Sometime I'll read this, but this is pretty interesting kind of humor, very deadpan. She has a really unique kind of wit of just they're almost kind of one point they kind of like almost like Stephen Wright jokes, like in the sense that they start off in a way that you don't expect to go. They just like start off in a kind of, and then kind of a Norm Macdonald comes to mind, a little bit Emo Phillips kind of humor, Um, but a little bit more dry, I think. But yeah, the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test by Tom Wolfe. I don't know if did I do this one yet. I thought it was a pretty funny read. The '60s must have been like a crazy time. '60s and '70s. Yeah, they had a massive kind of uh, outbreak of people interested in like acid. Taking acid. You know, a great big enlightenment of like and ideas too. Kind of like a really big creative recrudescence of people like coming together and being, and taking acid, which is pretty, for the time, I don't think it was as strong as it is maybe. But I think like um, people had acid blotters, and they had this school bus they were driving around. I think it was Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and something else he was writing at the time. I think I can't remember. But he sometimes a great notion. I think is his other work, which is pretty big. Um, yeah, him, Ken Kesey, and of all people, maybe not. Maybe this isn't surprising. Neil Cassidy, who was the kind of the prototypical kind of real life inspiration for Jack Kerouac's On the Roads. Sal, wait, not Sal Paradise. What was his name? Ken Kesey. The Dean Moriarty. Yes, it came to me, and I knew that my mind isn't that cooked, even though it is getting quite late. So, hence why I might want to split this into two parts. But we'll see about that. Anyway, so One Flew with the Cuckoo's Nest. What else was there? Wait, no, I didn't finish June, did I? Okay, hold up. Electric Kool-Aid. Okay, so did I anything else to say about that? They followed the Beatles around. I think the Beatles were on their own tour. A school bus. They took inspiration from the Beatles too, and they were actually trying kind of in hopes to get the Beatles coming to their thing too. But the Beatles, I don't know if they ever showed up to that. Um, yeah, definitely really interesting kind of thing. The yeah, they mentioned Herman Hesse too. Herman Hesse had a reinterest kind of surge in interest in the '60s too, because of all these people like Steppenwolf Theater is named after one of my favorite novels ever. Um, The Tale for the Time Being. Sorry, I didn't try to introduce you to the next thing. The Tale for the Time Being. I did a review on this. Loved it with Ozeki. I've only read one other thing. Time Code of the Face, I think. But I'd love to read My Year of Meats. I have it like right on my next thing to do, almost my next thing. But yeah, I love her style. A little bit like it's like Murakami's kind of dreamscapey world meets Miyako Kawakami, and there's like a bit of like a modernist kind of Virginia Woolf kind of Marcel Proust kind of look into the lens into the world, and how musings on time and passages of time and stuff like that, and the Zen Buddhism. Oh, it's really rich in that too. I love that. Her mother, I think she is no wait, Ruth Ozeki is a licensed actual like tried and true Buddhist or priest, I think. So, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's. Oh, sorry, July. Yeah, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey or Kesey. I think I reviewed that already. Obviously, really great movie directed by Milos Forman, who I thought for the longest time was Mexican, and then, but I knew for at least like maybe like 7 years or something that I knew was like Czech, Czechoslovakian, but I thought Milos, if you were to test me, Milos kind of doesn't really sound all that Czech, but Czechoslovakian has some weird names too, like or Czech and Polish too, like Krzysztof or stuff like that. Then there's another Polish author I heard about good things that I keep wanting to read. It's not Kundera, it's somebody else. Um, The Fall by Albert Camus. Sorry. I swore I'd get all the French names. Yeah, reread that because I was so like the first time I read it, I didn't take in appreciation the full swoo of the just how. And I think I did a review on this. Yeah, I did. I'm pretty sure because it wasn't that long ago. It couldn't have been because the re oh well the reread. Yeah, this was half a year ago, and I guess yeah, it wasn't long ago. Wow, time passes. Anyway, The Fall by I read originally, I want to say like 2020 or so, 2019. And like I said, I kind of scoured, not, I didn't like flow through it, but I felt like I didn't fully taken the, as much as I should have, like absorbing truly like just how wild and like how like manic and like moralistic and humanistic and like fault info and kind of self-interested at the same time the main character is, like how egotistical he is, yet at the same time he's like so many different things. um the Philosophy of Spiritual Experience by Rudolf Steiner. I heard of him, I guess, through, I think, Goethe and different people talking about, because he was a big kind of Goethe follower and acolyte of his philosophy, and in so doing, he was kind of really far-reaching, kind of ingenious, kind of masterful, kind of in so many different ways. Like he was like an architect. He made this thing called the Goetheanum, I think it was called, in somewhere in Germany or Austria. So and he, yeah, really, he's started this movement or this philosophy called anthroposophy, which is the only way I can describe it is that it's possible for humanity to have a spiritual experience with God in the now. Like it's not like a kind of a distant kind of thing, or it's not just a metaphysical kind of gesture to pray or to do this. Like the God is like incarnate in everything, and it kind of, I don't know if that's what part of the philosophy, but God is embodied in a kind of a spirit, kind of a world spirit, kind of not necessarily Hegelian kind of spirit, but just kind of he's like, I can only think about this in the way that Spinoza kind of thought about God, as the universal order of things, but I'm not too sure, because there's also kind of this idea that it, like Mircea Eliade kind of hinted at this too, this idea of the in the sacred and the profane, that there's a image kind of God too, like the image is, you're not a like nobody can see it because it's like it would be the death of you, but at the same time it's also possible, like to actually, this is what the what are those there used to be these rituals that you would have, it's on the tip of my tongue, started with an A, I think, that hypothesis or some kind of I don't know, some kind of ritual where spiritual connection with God is, and like it's not just a, you're taking, man can take part in this kind of thing, so it's like a really interesting, but also very dense. Like I can't really quite make heads or tails of like a lot of what China was getting at, but hence why I would like to read more of him. Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. I love this one. I'm still trying to do a review on it, but I want to do justice on it, so I want to try to kind of get my facts straight before I dive right in. But yeah, it was a lot more. It's been kind of compared to Native Son by but I think what Ralph Ellison was getting at, and he has another one that I have on my list called Juneteenth. But yeah, the reason I don't want to jump right into reviewing it quite yet is because I don't know, I want to kind of let it marinate a little bit more, kind of the themes and the because it was like 500 something page book, and yeah, he goes on like so many kind of different detours in the really good, in a way that doesn't lose interest. Like I felt like my interest is pretty invested in the this young, the main character's like plight and frustration, and him being obviously feeling invisible or spurned, and not really paid attention to, and like how he's like involved in these kind of unionized kind of people, and these that pretend to look out for his best interest, and to want to kind of train him, and but they really don't have. They kind of throw him to the wolves like the second that they see fit. So there's a lot of kind of backstabbing and infighting and stuff like that, even among his own people. And then he's kind of like chosen as a kind of a successor. I think at some point his but his plight is never his it keeps going on throughout the novel, like the whole it's a rough read at sometimes. You really get the a full kind of um encapsulated sense of like what you know um anyway. So after that was The Dollhouse by Heinrich Ibsen. I kept hearing about it in kind of some popular culture kind of references as well. I thought it was kind of funny, kind of way, a little kind of peek into the kind of the world of what the 1800s, late 1800s of Heinrich Ibsen. Or maybe those earlier, kind of a romantic period. Yeah, he wrote Norwegian. Yeah, yeah, he has a he wrote Peer Gynt. The long opera by the was it Schubert? I can't remember. Really famous opera, obviously. So lots of kind of folklore tour, like folklore of kind of these old kind of Norwegian kind of Scandinavian tales. The Razor's Edge by William Somerset Wrong. I did a review on this. I really like this. I thought at some points where it kind of got a little bit kind of far. I don't know, like a little bit too highfalutin at sometimes. But at other times, like I thought like it was like spot on, kind of like a really Bildungsroman kind of thing, where the main character goes through a lot of changes and fortuitous kind of um, ways of life, and yeah, I would like to read the what's it called, the Pale, what's it called? There's a movie with wasn't it called something, the Pale something Veil? The movie with Edward Norton and Selma Hayek, I think. Painted Veil, not the Pale Veil. I'm confusing it with the Pale Fire, maybe. Um, Liza of Lambeth by W. Somerset Maugham. Oh, I guess it was right after one another. This is a really sad story. I would like to review sometime. It's a poor kind of a picture. This is Somerset Maugham's first thing. His first book was like 1896. That was like a while ago. He had a pretty big career too. He lived a pretty long life too. Um, so used to kind of hearing about writers' short lives, dying young due to various health concerns and stuff. But yeah, yeah, this is kind of this is like a very unapologetic picture. Liza of Lambeth, of like a late, kind of Victorian, you know, early kind of industrial age, kind of on the dawn of the century, kind of, how, depressing this poor lady's life is, and she's like, slowly dying, and of how new. I think she's typhoid and other kind of multiple kind of things, ailed with, and yeah, this kind of but she keeps her head up. She has like a really a I liked the how like he didn't like make her like a morbid character herself, but it was only the people around her. Like she was a pretty flat arc where she was the whole time she was pretty upbeat. I think the whole with all things considered. Um, The Lady's Paradise by Emil Zola. I thought this was like a little bit too. I think it's like all these ladies get together, and they this is a part of his like big not LQ comedy, the human comedy, but it's like it's like a dozen or so novels, kind of maybe more, I think, put together in a compendium of on the theme of kind of France. I think the turn of the century France too. I guess he would have been there around the same time as Somerset Maugham, um, maybe older, I think. But yeah, Zola, yeah, the the whole thing with the what was it, the Dreyfus affair of the, was that 1900, I think 1901, and yeah, it was a, yeah, it was a major historical event, yeah, and I think I mentioned it enough times, and it like got seeped in through different videos, so I'm gonna kind of skip that. But yeah, Ladies Paradise, pretty. I thought it kind of, for what it was about, I thought it was a little bit too long. Like it kind of overstayed its welcome. Um, but this, all these ladies running a sewing shop together, had some pretty funny kind of dramatic moments going on. Ripe, was it ripe for comedic kind of moments in there too. Um, but yeah, it's like, again, it's like a naturalist kind of thing. So the natural school is at showing things exactly as they are. So, and without embellishment or dream, if any kind of dreamy kind of things, unless that's kind of what the characters are experiencing. So I think it's different from realism, because I think if you look at like Balzac, he was more, I think, in the realist kind of thing, and he's like showing them a little bit more with, you see like a character, like almost like the author's stance on it, like the moralist stance. Like you see Dostoevsky's kind of moral, like saying like not directly, but like obviously indirectly even still. But you see with the um this kind of literature is like a more of a meditation on these things, not only, but with a kind of an edge of like a moral, ethical kind of stance of like saying like this isn't right or something, or like this person got senselessly killed or whatever, thus this, but that's not right or anything like that. And yeah, it kind of goes into the belly of the darkness in order to kind of make that point. So anyway, so The Lady's Paradise, Antiquities by Cynthia Ozick. I feel like I love Ozick so far. The Shaw was, I think I did a review on that. It was, if I haven't, I really should, because it was like a one of my favorite short stories. The way it's told, and I think Antiquities kind of had, it was doing almost like a little bit of a Nabokov thing going on there, because she's talking about a man who's works in some kind of this family kind of business of, I can't remember, or no, a school kind of, maybe he was a school kind of faculty, and he's um writing a thing. This is an interesting thing, is that because the writing, and this is fairly recent too. It's like 2020 something that she wrote this. So yeah, she's still pretty prolific out there writing, and she's really old too. Like I'm not trying to like just sound like a little kid, like oh someone so is really old, but she's like, I want to say born in 1928, I think. So yeah, her and Joyce Carol Oates too are kind of come to mind as my favorite contemporary fiction, kind of creative fiction. And yeah, so Antiquities wasn't too long of a read, but I felt like it got lost in, not lost, just kind of the, so it's told through the medium of this guy, of an older man on this kind of faculty, writing a letter of, almost like an acceptance letter or some kind of something that's supposed to be not really much, but he ends up going into this really long kind of elaborate kind of super descriptive, vivid kind of thing of like the dreams of all of his past and his father's past, and he starts talking about all of these different kind of Egyptian kind of antiquity, hence the title, all these kind of the spoils of kind of archaeology, and spoils of Egypt, and getting away with how back in the early 1900s people would just kind of pillage these places without any um any much of a drawback or anything for that. So they would, but yeah, I got lost kind of in how the arc of the story was, like it was told. The medium became of that story, or it became kind of the story itself. I think is what this. So it's a little bit more postmodern than her some of her other works. So, um, yeah, but I still liked it. I just kind of kind of feel like I might need to reread it. Tibetan Book of the Bed by Tim Leary, and that's obviously um I heard about him through different things, various medias over the years. Whether it's through like was it Richard Straussman, I think, doctor, all these different kind of people in psychedelics and stuff like that talking about him. pretty interesting take on the old kind of manuscript of the ancient kind of Tibetan Book of the Dead. But it's obviously his kind of, it's just him using, it's through a kind of psychedelic lens of like what of being responsible, and how, how to best not, how to best kind of use kind of as use like psychedelics as kind of a causeway for enlightenment in some sense, of like at least kind of tasting enlightenment, but not in a way of encouraging people just to kind of like senselessly, irresponsibly take drugs. So I think like that was, I respected that part, I think. So, um, but yeah, really interesting kind of guy, Tim Leary. Um, I know why. I know why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. Um, Loved that. I kept meaning to read that for years and years. For some reason, in school, even though it's normally required for most schools, I think, required reading, I still feel, for some reason, our curriculum did not have it included anywhere. So I was like, oh well, I gotta read this sometime. I was wanting to read it at least, for years and years. I was trying to, and then I was like, oh well, her autobiography mixed with like some poetry and poetic kind of recollections of her past, and how, being born into really impoverished kind of southern town, I believe Tennessee, is that where, Alabama, I think. She talks about the churches and how the kind of the gospel scene was very vibrant and very, um, even though she was like taken advantage of, like really, dealt a horrible hand. She was like, she found light. There was kind of a light in the community that she grew up with, and she ended up wanting to go and to seek higher education and learn, and she ended up writing poetry and stuff, and got married, and she ended up having the kid that that her abuser left her with. So she ended up having a really strong kind of bond to that kid, and this the title titular bird of I know why the caged bird sings is pretty much a a not a peon maybe, or it's like a reflection on loneliness in a way that Ralph Ellison too, the way he dealt with so many hardships, and just trying to gain like one semblance of like any sense of like, I don't know, fit like just a it, I don't know how to articulate that. It's like anyway, but the after that I've read Under the Shadow of Etna by Giovanni Varga. I don't know how I heard about Varga. He was Italian though, right? Um, but it was an interesting kind of book. It was, I want to say, it's just late or early 1900s, I think. Um, I think there was another. Oh, it might have been because Angel Gamera wrote around the same time, I think. And there's a kind of a similar kind of thing going on with the. Some of his stuff reminded me a bit of the Lorca, I think, the Spanish poet, and I think like Shadow of Etna. I think there was this. It talks about kind of a, honestly, kind of a um, village community. I think that in kind of a way that Newt Hampson talks about. Um, there's a this kind of a love of farming, and that this community had, and they're trying to kind of, I think that's where it's like right near Mount Etna, I think so. But they're all trying to kind of scramble together, and I guess um, to live a simpler life together, I guess. Um, but yeah, I liked it. I thought it was pretty. Um, A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. I reviewed that. Rough read, but funny at times if you take it with as the is meant, as satire, pretty much. The Apprenticeship in the Book of Pleasures by Clarice Lispector. Love that one. I'd like to really want to review this too. A really interesting kind of reflection on love and young romance. This the loneliness and the kind of the inner monologues that you get that aren't trite or seem misplaced either. Like you feel like Lucy really understands like her characters, and and like she had an empathy for them. She she lived in her characters too in a way. Um, but they weren't just like mindless self inserts either. But they were fully fleshed, genuine kind of characters. And she's talking about this kind of couple, and the one man is kind of a brawny kind of macho man, but he has a soft spot, and he has a soft spot for kind of a poetic kind of learning, and he's kind of going. I think he's educated too. He's well educated, and I think that's where they learn is that the main character, I can't remember her name, but she's like a school teacher though. I remember that, and she's a lot more kind of studied than him, and um, but he has this aspect of adventure to him that makes them kind of click in a way that clink together, and they're able to kind of connect on the basis of a few things, like shared interest. But it's not just. I think it's like an interesting kind of meditation on love being sometimes not everything. It's like it's not meant to be like this. Oh, like people are perfectly compatible and people have the exact same interests and the exact same personalities. But like it's more so like a thing on how love can sometimes be a almost like a kind of estrangement. Like you feel like how like it's hard to truly maybe like understand how people like that could even share any mutual interest at all. But like at the same time, like they end up, I guess, having um, seeing past those differences. And after that, I read The Beach by Alex Garland. I think I did a review on that. Really, kind of not sure. I'm the kind of like of two minds of that whole thing. Um, the Allen Ginsberg Poetry Collection by Allen Ginsberg. I read some of his stuff before, but only in kind of small doses, like Howl. Like I must have listened to that at least 2 times, I think. But yeah, these after that I read The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock and Other Poems by T.S. Eliot, which I thought was really interesting. Because I never read it before. So, and I read some of those a little bit before when I read the something I read by him back at least like 5 or 6 years ago, I think. I can't remember. Um, oh yeah, the thing was The Cocktail Party, which is a play by T.S. Eliot, and he also wrote Cats too. But I think that's I'm gonna try to save that for a different day. And yeah, Not Dead Yet by Herbert Gold. I don't know. I was recommended this on on Amazon or something, and I saw it on my wish list, and I thought that I don't know, it had an interesting ring to it. But then he just like kind of started name dropping a lot. It had an interesting start, definitely different kind of interesting kind of um, characters, real life characters. Obviously, kind of it's pretty much just him talking about himself. But yeah, he's talking about I don't know, like he just seemed to kind of, ooh, I knew this one kind of Beat Generation poet or something. It's just like okay, like good for you guys, man. It's like you, but I don't know if maybe he was like satirizing that kind of style, maybe, and I just didn't know it. I don't know. Alright, A Pale View of the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I loved Never Let Me Go by him, and I'd like to read what was the Akira, I think was something it was like oh yeah, The Remains of the Day, I think. That's the one. But Pale View of the Sun had yeah, I'm gonna have to look more into that kind of because I'd like to review that sometime too. Um but yeah, I love his style too. It's like I don't know. The poems of Sappho by Sappho. Yeah, I didn't know until semi recently. Because I had in my mind, like the island of Lesbos where she was from. She was pretty old poet, like way back in the when her one of her loves. I think her name was Etna or something, or started with an E. And they're born in a time of like I want to say like the early like the 7th century or something of like BC, so like way back. But yeah, from the island of Lesbos. So like island of Lesbos is where the term lesbian comes from, and I didn't know that until like semi recently after like was like, oh, I wonder if there's a connection there. And it turns out there was. And she was a very beautiful poet too, like very like the original kind of love ballad kind of uh through this ancient kind of lens is just like shows that romance, love, feelings of longing and um fulfillment or lack of fulfillment or transcend not only genres and not only but also time as well. I'm gonna try to wrap this up for now, and I'll start a new one because I really gotta get a drink of water and I have to go to the bathroom as well. So, I'll see you in a little bit.